General government budget, we will be moving forward. I guess I would first ask if there are any bill introductions from anybody on the committee or in the audience. Any bill introductions? Seeing none, our first order of business is to have our informational hearing on the Kansas Public Employment Retirement System. And would staff, I believe, give us an overview? Recommendation. I'm thinking just because that. Yes, so if our assistant, and I apologize, your name? Stephen Wu?
Yep, for the record,
very good.
Senior Fiscal Analyst with Legislative Research. I'll be speaking from this document on the Kansas Public Employees Retirement System. Before I start, I want to recognize that Executive Director Alan Conroy is with us in the room today. He'll be able to provide some testimony after I'm done speaking to give some further clarification on the operations of the agency as well as on how the overall system is doing. I'm going to keep my remarks fairly brief. There aren't a significant number of changes with the budget this year for this agency. My remarks will be kept to, for the most part, the first couple of pages. So on the first page, page 1, you'll see an overview of the agency, including the numbers for the agency's budget for fiscal years 21 to 23. Now, when we talk about KPERS, it's important to note that KPERS refers to both the KPERS retirement system as a whole, the employee's pension system, as well as KPERS as an agency. As a system, KPERS refers to the benefits programs, including KPERS State, School and Local, the Kansas Police and Firemen's Retirement System, and the Kansas Retirement System for Judges. It also refers to some programs within the KPERS agency, such as the Deferred Compensation Program, as well as the Death and Disability Benefits Program. It's important to note that the expenditures for the KPERS retirement system are considered non-expense items. They're one state entity paying the cost to another, so they aren't included within this budget analyses. In some budget documents, you'll see them reflected as non-expense items. Those aren't included in the final to avoid double counting. Now, as an agency, KPERS refers to the entity that is in charge of overseeing the administration for these programs. Now, costs for KPERS as an agency are reflected in this budget and will be what I'm talking about today. As a general note, the agency is funded, doesn't include any SGF funding, nothing from the State General Fund. It's entirely funded by, its funding sources are from investment income, employer contributions, member contributions, and so on. Now, if I'll have you turn the page to page 2, you'll see a high-level executive summary on the agency's budget for this for these fiscal years. I'll start with 22. So that is in the middle section of that page. You can find additional details on 22 on page 6, but for the purposes of brevity, I'll keep my remarks focused on this section. Now, for fiscal year 22, the agency requests about $63.1 million in expenditures and 98.4 FTE positions. This is a bit higher than what the legislature approved of last year. The 2021 legislature approved about the increase is about $2.6 million higher than what the legislature approved last year, and the FTE number remains the same. Now, this increase is primarily due to investment management expenses. These are fees for investment managers that are based on performance of the overall portfolio. As some context, when the agency submits its budget, it builds in cost for these management expenses at an assumed 7.75% return. When the portfolio, when returns to the portfolio and growth exceeds that percentage, then accordingly, those fees to investment managers increase as well. So for the previous fiscal year, 21, the system's total return was 26.3%, a bit over that 7.75% assumed rate of return. So accordingly, the overall investment management fees are higher as well. Now, for fiscal year 22, the governor concurs with the agency's request, doesn't recommend any changes. So for the governor's recommendation, it's the same 63.1 million and 98.4 FTE positions. For fiscal year 23, the agency requests about 67.7 million in expenditures and again, 98.4 FTE positions. This is an increase over the previous year, about 4.6 million. This is primarily due to two big items. The first one is for investment expenses, same increases for the same idea as in 22. There's about 1.8 million increased for these investment management expenses. There's also about a 2.6 million increase for costs related to modernization of the pension administration program. Now, this pension administration system, this system is a software system that the agency uses to help collect employer contributions, pay benefits, and overall to help run and manage the overall pension system. The 2020 legislature approved of expenses to get this ball rolling. So in the years that followed, we'll see a steady increase of expenses as the agency implements, designs, and puts in place the new pension administration system. So what that means in terms of expenditures for 22, we'll see an overall expenditures of about 6.6 million. The legislature last year approved of that amount for 22. We'll see that increase a bit in 23 to 9.2 million. That's about a little over a $2.6 million increase as the agency gets into the height of implementing this new system. And for 24 and 25, the agency estimates about 9 million in expenditures to continue these operations before these expenses start tapering off in about fiscal year 26. You can find additional details for this on page 9. You'll see a gray box on page 9 that gives a bit of a history on the pension administration system modernization project. It's a mouthful. It'll give an overview of some of the backgrounds, how we got to this point, and what the agency estimates in expenditures for the fiscal years to come. Now, on page 4, you'll see a breakdown of the agency's expenditures by category. I believe this committee is pretty familiar with these categories by now: salaries and wages, contractual services, commodities, and so on. You'll also see overall history of the agency's primary funding sources. Of note, the two that are identified here are the Kansas Public Employee Retirement Fund as well as the Group Insurance Reserve Fund. You'll see a bit of detail on histories and statutory references of how this fund gets its money and how the agency estimates those funds. The last point I want to point out in this agency's budget is on page 11 to the end of the document. Not going to go into detail unless the committee would like for me to, but this is a program by program level breakdown of expenditures for the agency. There's just a handful of programs within the CAPERS agency. There's an administrative program, there's a program for CAPERS investments, a program for deferred compensation, and one for death and disability benefits. You'll be able to see on each of these pages a history of expenditures for those programs, as well as some high-level performance-based budgeting numbers for them as well. Now, at this point, we'd be happy to entertain questions from the committee, or in the absence of questions, turn it over to Director Conroy.
Does anyone in the committee have questions for staff on CAPERS? Anything?
I didn't have anything for staff.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to ask if anybody was.
Oh, yes, thank you. Is there anybody who is online as far as members of the committee? Anybody? Staff? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First question on, I'm just looking at the first page, and it was in fiscal year 2021, so I'm going back. When it says federal funds, is that typical to get federal funds?
Oh, those were distributions for coronavirus relief.
Okay. And then the second question, and just I'm asking this because I'm not a member of CAPERS, so I don't fully understand. The all other funds, how are they receiving those other funds? Is that the pay-in from the employee?
It's a mix. So you can see a bit more of a breakdown on page 4 under financing in that table. In short, it's a mix of income from investments, contributions from employers, contributions from employees, and some other distributions of funds. But it's primarily those 3 big categories.
Anyone else for Mr. Wu? Oh, yes, Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just looking at figure 1, we've got a 24.5% increase in the budget from over 2021. I'm assuming that's part of the modernization program that we're talking about. And you're saying that's going to continue to increase over the next few years?
Yes. So the 2 big items for change from the previous fiscal year, you can see it in detail on page 7. The big changes are 1, the modernization of the pension administration system. It's a multi-year project. So as they get into it, you'll see those expenditures increase for a couple of years and then taper off.
Okay.
The other is for those investment management expenses.
Mr. Chairman, if I have one more question, please. Can you kind of explain in general detail the difference between the 3 CAPERS programs, the state, the school, and not the state, I mean the police and firemen and the system for the judges? What's the main difference between those 3?
Sure. At a very high level, the main differences are the parties that are part of those systems. So for the main CAPERS program, CAPERS state, school, and local, those are for state and local employees, employees of school districts, technical colleges, as well as some state correctional officers and so on. The Kansas Police and Firemen's Retirement System, KPNF, is for designated state and local public safety employees. And lastly, the retirement system for judges is for judges within the state of Kansas. So this is the parties included within.
So are there any differences in the benefits from each one of those?
Yes, the benefits vary between those different programs. I'd have to follow up after this meeting with details, or I could turn it over to Director Conroy to answer. I'm sure if he would have the information with him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Mr. Chairman.
We're in questions. I do have a question.
Very good. Representative Wagner.
All right. No, thank you. An excellent presentation. Thank you very much. I do have a question or two. So I'm looking here on the 406 report for CAPERS, and the full-time equivalent positions did not change from fiscal year 21 to 22, though total salaries and wages went up like 1.7 million, which seems to not even after being adjusted for shrinkage, which I would take would be unfilled positions typically. And so what explains that? Or do you have a notion? I can ask, I'll ask the CAPERS folks since they're here, but I just don't know if you had a notion.
Sure. I'll leave it for the director to explain it in further detail, but at a very high level, when you hire someone for a certain position, say it's for a computer scientist, as an example, if depending on their skill level, you could pay them more or less. So add that up over a number of employees year to year, and it can total up to a larger amount. And especially as the agency has been focusing more on updating its computer systems, as I understand it, the technical expertise required for that is a bit higher than normal.
Okay. Just another question.
One question I wanted to ask though, was that under contractual services?
This was under salaries and wages.
Salaries and wages. Okay, very good. I'm with you now.
So then my next question was, now I understand why the big jump that it was, the computer modernization was one part of it, and the higher management fees based on the higher returns in fiscal year 20. And so but I would presume that under fees, professional services, which jumped from 35 million to 43 million, was mostly the management fees, but the computerization, I don't see like it under like capital outlay or where is the computer modernization on this sheet?
If we're talking, expenses for the modernization of the pension administration system aren't isolated to a specific line in that report. They're kind of interspersed throughout based on the expenditure type. So you'll see some under fees for professional services. You'll see some for fees under other services, some for repairing and servicing. So it's interspersed throughout.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Have we covered 2023 yet? Okay, we have. I'm just getting up to speed. Good to see you, Stephen.
Hi.
All right, committee, any further questions for the analyst? Seeing none. Very good. I think we have Alan here to shed light on anything that we didn't ask prior to his arriving at the podium. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glad to be here and certainly be pleased to try to respond to any questions. I think there's some, first appreciate Stephen presenting the information and providing all that good background information for you. There is some written testimony at your seats, and I'll just at a very high level just remind you that the Board of Trustees, of course, concurs with the governor's recommendation, which she had concurred with the board, what the board had requested for fiscal year 22 and 23. And just to remind you, the CAPER system, you know, is there are those three retirement systems, the regular CAPERs, the police and fire, the public safety, and then the retirement system for judges. Retirement system for judges are all the state district court and magistrate judges, Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court are in that. Police and fire, the main state ones are the Highway Patrol and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, and then you get into local police departments or sheriff's department that have elected to join with police and fire. And then all the other public employees are in the regular CAPERs, so that'd be all the state employees, all the local units of government that have affiliated, all the local school districts. And there's about 1,500 employers in total that have affiliated with CAPERs, and we have now over 325,000 members, and that'd be active, inactive, and retired. Kind of the one question in terms of the benefit structure, a lot of it comes down to the multiplier, which is one of the key three. There's three drivers for most of the pension plans: the person, how long they've served, what their final average salary was or is, and then a multiplier. For regular CAPERs, it's about 1.85%. For police and fire, it's 2.5%. And then for judges, it's right there at a little over 3%. And so both of those, particularly judges and the police and the public safety one, there were, I guess, plan design decisions when they came up with the multiplier, when those systems were created. Police and fire, the ultimate sort of societal direction was they wanted a young, vigorous workforce, so it provides for earlier retirement, particularly for those, you know, law enforcement type duties. The judges' retirement system, it assumed that at the time that a lot of those attorneys would have a successful private practice and then would join the bench later on towards the end of their career. And so there's different vesting and provisions in each of those systems, but it really kind of comes down to that plan design. Public safety, young, vigorous workforce, judges kind of towards the end of their legal career, and then regular CAPERs. Just a little background, you know, lots in terms of our service, about 100,000 phone calls a year, about 24,000 emails to our members. We enroll about 32,000 new or returning members and some transferring there. And then there's about 6,000 people that retire every year. We send out about $1.3 million in retirement actual payments, and dollar-wise, it's about $1.9 billion. So lots of money's going out to pay those promised benefits that those public servants have earned. In terms of the funding source, and there was a good question there. And of course, this all comes into that trust fund. And of course, there's lots of good IRS requirements in terms of what a trust fund can be used for. And once the money's in, I guess I usually say it's the one sort of true lockbox in state government, because once that money gets in the trust fund, the only way it can get out is either to pay administrative expenses for the support of the fund, but really to pay those benefits. And so that's, I guess, an important distinction. But the revenues there on page 2 of the of my testimony is really about a little over half comes from investment revenues, about 53%, about a third comes from employer contributions, and then the balance comes from then the employee contributions. The regular capers at 6%, public safety at 7.15% is just a couple examples. As Stephen mentioned, the investment return this last calendar year, last fiscal year was 26.3%, and I wish we could do that every year. I'm not sure we're going to always be able to do that, but that would be wonderful if we could. As Stephen mentioned too, the assumed rate though is 7.775%. In terms of the budget, I think Stephen's really touched on the two main points. One is those investment-related expenses, and again, that's depends on, if the trust fund's doing better, so the 26.3%, those fees that we pay those managers, then they get a higher fee because they're performing well. And so those fees are higher than were anticipated when the budget was approved last year for fiscal year 2022, because we would have used that assumed rate of return, 7.775%. Total investment-related expenses are about $39 million in the current year and about $41 million in the budget year. And of course, the size of the trust fund now, we're between 25 and $26 billion. And so as a percentage, those total fees, and this is a lot of it's just driven by when you have $26 billion, you get economies of scale there, and those fund managers certainly work with us in terms of managing that money. So the total fees are about 0.8%, so about 0.15% for investment-related fees, and so certainly better than, I guess, at the retail level. If I would go to somewhere and try to get somebody to manage my investments, pay certainly a higher fee than that. The other big change in both the current year and the budget year relates to that administration modernization project, an IT project, and this is this modernization project is an area that touches really all the areas in terms of the operation of the system, all that money and information that comes in from employers and employees, all that compensation information, all that enrollment, service, all that, and then the whole payment out system is run through this pension administration system. You may remember we really started that program in 2005. So we've got quite a bit of life out of that software program. There have certainly been some changes through the years, most notably with the creation of Capers 2 and then Capers 3, which caused certainly some changes then to accommodate those changes within the system. And there are, as Stephen mentioned, there's two other trust funds. One is the Deferred Comp Trust Fund. That's a voluntary deferred comp program where individuals put in their own money to help save towards their retirement. Generally there's no employer contribution, so it's all employee money. It goes into a separate trust fund, and the fees to operate that deferred comp program were paid out of that trust fund. And then there's the Death and Disability Trust Fund. Most of the employees then are, if they were disabled, there's a benefit structure, and should they die while in active service, or once they retire, there's some death benefits associated with that. But again, the main drivers in the budget: modernization, and then the investment fees in the current year, that 26.3 versus the assumed 775. But then we assume that goes up 775 in the fiscal year 2023 budget. I mentioned last year we talked about on the modernization project, we did do a proof of concept to make sure we wanted to stay with our current vendor. And we did that. It was, I think, a successful endeavor. And so right now we're in negotiations to take that next step to continue on. We're just completing our as-is requirements for all those things that go on in the modernization project to make sure they're documented and there's a good foundation then to build forward in terms of the modernization project. But certainly got lots of additional information, but be glad to respond to any questions or help any way I may.
All right, well, thank you for being here, Director Conroy. How far, and this is not part of the budget that we will deal with, however, it's one that's been a thorn in my side since I got here. How far are we from being fully funded in the main Capers Fund?
Right, great question. The current amortization period that was set back in 1993 by the legislature, 40 years, so 2033, and then there's a little spillover, but that's based on the current amortization period. So we're about 12 years out, kind of depending on how you look at it, and have it in terms of having that unfunded actuarial liability paid off, and that assumes then we're to that goal of 100% funded.
We now at about 74, 75?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
In the 70s, mid-70s.
Excellent. We started this endeavor, we were somewhere at like 57?
56.
56, okay.
Yes.
My gosh, it's been quite a road, so I'm awfully excited to be coming in the home stretch on this thing.
Yeah, and it really has been, if I may, some really heavy lifting by the policymakers through the years. Those additional bonds, the additional, changes to the plan itself, those additional contributions besides the pension funding bonds as well, making that actuarially required rate, which means, of course, the employer's paying exactly what the actuary calculates. Unfortunately, there had been over a couple decades where that had not happened, and that drives up that unfunded liability.
And I think pulling in 25% doesn't hurt either.
Good point.
All right. Yes, Representative Varnberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple questions. One, is there anywhere in statute that it states, I thought I heard in the past that Capers had to be funded at 80% or higher. Is that not true? Is that just rumor?
Good. Well, that goal, the goal really is to get to that 100%, 2033. So that's what it says. In terms of the actuarial world, there's kind of three hurdles. If you're less than 60%, like we were back in 2012, then that means the red lights are going off, the sirens sounding, somebody better do something, because if you get a big downturn in the economy, that's going to drive then those investments down, funded ratio falls, and it makes it difficult then to climb your way back up. Between 60 and 80%, you're still kind of in that cautionary period, because again, if the market takes a big downturn, the goal is to be over 80, but still on your way to get to 100%. So the last big hurdle before you get to 100 is to be over 80.
Okay, and the second question I have is, I'm sure you have heard that many legislators want to fund Capers as much as possible this year with the extra revenues that we received from this previous year. With adding in $1 billion, as there is a bill right now to do that, adding in $1 billion, what percentage would that make Capers at?
Thank you, it would drive up that unfunded, or that funded ratio, and it kind of depends on the assumptions, but it's about 3.4%. I'm thinking of House Bill 2561, which is in the House Pensions or Insurance and Pensions Committee. But to answer your question, should that bill be enacted based on the current assumptions, it'd get you almost to 81%. It'd be 80.8%. So it gets you over that last big hurdle of 80%.
Okay, and if that is done, and I have not looked at the bill, but if it's done, I've heard that we will save 40 million each year moving forward. So then in the end, is your budget going to look drastically different or?
Well, actually, the savings then comes on lower employer contributions.
Okay.
Because the sort of the plug factor in terms of funding CAPER is we get that investments, we get the employee contributions, and then the employers are supposed to pay in whatever it needs to get to that actuarial required rate. So based on 2561 and the assumptions, because that also pays off those layering payments, those 20-year layering payments you may have heard about. But anyway, that would free up about $82 million a year in lower employer contributions. So for over the first 5 years, again, based on all the assumptions, it would save the state about $430 million in lower employer contributions. And I know that means you give us $1 billion, has a lot of zeros with it, but those first 5 years, it would save then employer contributions that go down. That means the state, which pays it, of course, for not only all state employees, but all local school employees. It's part of state aid to education. CAPER School Group is the largest, over 85,000 members. So that drives that down, and that's how you get that to that savings of 82 million, including you're currently paying 25 million a year on those layering payments, that 20-year payment plan that the legislature came up with for some missed payments.
Then sorry, final question is, we have currently with CAPERS, are there 2 bonds with CAPERS? So we just did one last year, correct?
You did, now you're up to 3. It was back in 2004, you issued, the legislature at the time issued, it was a $500 million, but because of the way of the financing, we got 440 million in 2004. And then in 2015, there was a $1 billion bond issued, and we got all of that. And then this last session, authorized a $500 million in bonds. So now there's 3 outstanding ones. They're all 30-year bonds. You know, they're just interest arbitrage bonds, particularly the first 2, of course, the 2004 and the 2015 have been working very well. Of course, the market's been strong, so there'll be ups and downs over that 30-year, but certainly of the 3 bonds, I can just tell you, after the state pays the debt service, we got the money. State's still paying debt service, but if you factor out that debt service payments, those bonds proceeds have earned $1 billion to the good right now. Now, again, they're 30-year bonds, could change in the near future or 5 years from now, but those bonds have worked, just interest arbitrage bonds, but they've certainly worked as anticipated.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, further questions for Alan? Yes, Representative Wagner.
No, thank you, Mr. Conroy. You've had some very good explanations. I do have a question on these management fees. So the management fee system is set up not on the basis of how the amount of assets, it's based on the increase in assets. Is that, what is the structure on that?
I mean, in general, it's assets under management. So as the value of those assets go up, then they're paying fees on that assets under management.
Okay. So it's just basically you went from 22 billion up to 25 billion, and so now it's the same percentage, but just on the higher. Okay. That was my question. Thank you very much.
Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Conroy, always a pleasure to see you. Going back to some of the questions that Representative Arnberger was raising, the governor's recommendation on paying off her recommendation as compared to the $1 billion that is being proposed in the one bill. What is the difference in those 2 bills as far as the effect on CAPERS?
Right. The one point is, of course, the governor's recommendation pays off those layering payments. So it's a payment of about $253 million that would pay. So it's prepaying those 20-year layering payments. So we'd get 253, and I think the state then, as opposed to paying, those annual payments over 20 years, saves about, no, I'm sorry, the total savings to the state. Yeah, 172 million. So that's the difference. The state's paying 25 million a year. If you pay it now versus what you pay over the next 20 years, you would pay $172 million less. The one thing, of course, that money then comes into the trust fund, so we have it to invest. So that's a good thing rather than waiting for, that money to come over the next 17, 18 years, and not that any future legislature would change their mind and perhaps do something different, but that's what the law provides now. So our actuary has already factored in those layering payments in her actuarial projections, funded ratio, unfunded actuarial liability. So if we get the cash, it's not going to move the needle on the unfunded liability or the funded ratio, because our actuary says that's what the Kansas law says. So she's already factored that in to her projections in those out years. But on the other side, again, that gets cash in the trust fund. And hopefully, if we can outperform 775, then that will be a plus for the system on down the road. So let's see, I'm trying to think on the funded ratio, it was about 2% for the layering. Well, I guess it doesn't change that. So really it's just cash in. So that's into the trust fund so we can manage it. So, and that, I'm sorry, and it frees up the state budget in those annual payments of about 25 million a year.
One final question, then. What effect does it have on the state general fund?
It frees up that 25 million right now, I believe, coming out of the state general fund. So that frees up 25 million then for other purposes as you all deem appropriate. So.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm excited when it gets into the lockbox. The challenge is getting it there. That's so if we can get rid of the layered payments or throw an extra, billion that we have laying around. Either one I'm good with, so long as it actually gets into the lockbox, because I realize that future legislators would never change plans midway through. Seen it happen. Yes, Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for another shot. Mr. Conroy, this doesn't directly relate to your budget, but it is a question where I understand the Capers Board is looking at changing their expected rate of return from 7.75% to what? No, I mean, you know what I mean. I said so. What? Because I know that would change your whole percentages and everything.
That's correct. You make a good point. That assumed rate of return, the board gets to set it. It's a delegated authority by the legislature. It's set at 7.5. It had been at 8% for, my goodness, decades. And then back in 2016, the board lowered it to 7.75. Since that time, our investment consultants, our consulting actuary, and just in the pension administration world, we're certainly at the high end at 8% used to be really kind of the marker. And now I'd say that marker is down to about 7.25 or 7%. And it's looking, what's the anticipated, returns as we look forward or try to guess. But you're right. That's probably one of the single biggest drivers on that calculation of the unfunded liability and the funded ratio. Because again, over half of that income, at least currently, has come from on the investment side, from investments. So now, and again, as you're looking, of course, in the pension world, we're looking out 30 or 40 years. Well, now all of a sudden, if you assume whatever you want to assume, and the board hasn't made a decision, they're still gathering information and all that. But, even if they went down to, 7.25, well, now that's 0.5% less on those assumed projections over the next 40 years on a base of $26 billion. It can have a big, big impact. So that will whatever they decide, it will increase unfunded liability, assuming they want to reduce it. That'll increase the unfunded liability and decrease that funded ratio.
That decision is made when?
They're gathering information. I'm not sure, they've asked for their actuary to do several different analysis and more information for along that line. So I'm not sure when they're going to do it. I'm guessing perhaps maybe this calendar year sometime, or if not, certainly by next early part of next calendar year.
Representative French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Conroy, for being here. I really appreciate your expertise in financing, because I sure don't understand half what you're saying, but
Sorry about that.
I really appreciate your expertise in this particular account. I'm sure you're aware, you're tracking the fact that there's an effort right now to add COLA. There's two bills, one in the Senate and one in the House. I assume you've looked at that. How are those bills possibly going to affect your budget?
Right. So the cost of living adjustment for retirees, it does take an act of the legislature, and the legislature previously had done that on a pretty frequent basis. But the last time that the legislature, it's been, well, really anybody who's retired since 1998 has not gotten a cost of living adjustment or some type of adjustment. So it's been a long time. In fact, 88% of the current retirees have not received a cost of living adjustment of some. I think I may hear from some of them too. So 88% haven't. So the problem is, cost of living adjustments are not part of the design of CAPERS, so, and it's a pre-funded system. So if clearly the legislature can adjust benefits, can provide a cost of living adjustment, but that means then there's no money set aside for that, so it adds to the unfunded actuarial liability. And there's, it could either, through the years, I mean, you could pay for it up front, you know, and depending on the design and, you know, how you want to structure it, you know, it could be an upfront payment, you know, $250 to probably $300 million for a one-time permanent benefit increase. Or you could pay for it, sometimes in the past they've been amortized over 15 years. So you provide the increase and then you be reflected in those higher employer contributions for the next 15 years to pay off for this increase. And again, that could be, again, how it's structured, but maybe in the $15 to $17 million range. And so the board trustees, the Joint Pensions Committee had asked for the board to weigh in on that subject. And then at their January board meeting, they did point out the length of time, the 1998, the 88% that have never received a COLA, and certainly noted the impact of the inflation since that time. If you'd retired in 1998 and here it's 2022, it's a big inflation certainly had an impact on the buying power. The board did do one caveat. They pointed out their priority here over the last several decades has been funding, particularly following when we were at that 56%. So funding's been perhaps, I think, the highest priority for the board to try to right that funding position of the trust fund. And so the Board of Trustees' recommendation back to the Joint Pensions Committee was that if one's granted, certainly warranted, but that it should be funded up front. So that, in effect, it should be that $250 or $300 million should be paid so it doesn't add to that unfunded actuarial liability.
One more question, Mr. Chairman. I don't, do you have this?
I do.
17.
Moratorium on dying.
I guess.
That I would have to check. That's right. It was a change in accounting standards provisions, and so it was reflected in another program, and now it's separated out and reflected in this. Good
A
question.
little weird to me. Okay, thank you.
It was,
Commissioner.
it is.
The questions? Seeing none. Well, thank you for being here, Director Conroy.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Pleasure. All right, committee. Let's put different hats on now. We'll take a look at a couple of budgets. Let's make it 4 instead. Governmental Ethics Commission, Kansas Lottery, Racing and Gaming, and the Hearing Aid Examiners budgets. These will be reported out Tuesday. Oh, wait, that's tomorrow. So let's get to work on them. What do you say? First up, we'll look at the Governmental Ethics Commission. I'm going to find it here real quick. All right, obviously, the one thing that jumps out on the, well, certainly the 23, I don't think, yeah, there wasn't dramatic change in 22, but in 23, the salary pay plan is pretty dynamic. The governor recommended raises for everyone except the director. The agency recommended raises for everyone, including the director. It seems to me that we're already discussing a across-the-board pay raise in the governor's budget recommendation. I'm not sure jumping in with an additional salary enhancement on this agency when we have that one still kind of pending. I'm not sure that's going to be a consistent move for the committee. Those are the only notes I had regarding this one. Comments, feedback from the committee. Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wasn't the increases in wages based on the study that was done and the adjustments there too?
That's correct. Yeah, I guess the agency took it upon themselves to do a study, and a salary comparison study, yes. Although I haven't seen that salary comparison study.
Said just a second ago, are you suggesting adjustment from the governor's recommendation on the pay?
Well, the governor recommended a partial adoption.
Right.
And that was looping in everyone that was going to be probably covered by the global adjustment anyway. So I'm actually thinking that we don't adopt any of it and wait for the universal to come through and see how it affects the agency.
Mr. Chair, may I go ahead and just make the motion to start the process? Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we pass out the General Ethics Commission budget for fiscal year 2022 and 2023 as the governor recommended.
Excellent, thank you. And it's been seconded. Now let's make our scribbles on it. Restoring the June 2020 allotment was part of the governor's recommendation, so I'm cool with that. Yeah, the only thing I would say would be to cut off the thing numbered number 4 there, partial adoption of salary pay plan enhancement request, which is a reduction of 48,423 from SGF. Pending the universal salary adjustment. It'll probably be done in omnibus. That's what's being discussed, yes. Will it be that? I don't know, but that's what's being discussed currently, right?
I understand that. So the work that was done by the agency to elevate several of the positions that are in the agency was done to bring them up to level,
Third lowest to fifth lowest.
whatever it was, right? I think that's a pretty solid recommendation.
I think it's a solid recommendation. I just, if we're going to be doing pay raises elsewhere, I don't want to get this agency out of whack with everyone else, is my thought process. Representative French.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with you. I think we need to see what the overall pay raise is going to be before we start doing individual agency pay raises. To me, this opens Pandora's box.
That's the part I didn't say, is that we tell the folks on our next budget here what we did. Hey, we did an in-house survey too.
They talked about this just being a reset, but I'm sorry, a reset, it's an increase.
Yeah, it's a pay raise. And if we're going to be doing it across the board, I say we do it across the board. It's me.
Mr. Chair, is there an amendment proposed as of
I
right?
would amend striking the governor's recommendation for the plan enhancement, for the pay plan enhancement.
Second.
Right? Discussion? Being none, all those in favor say aye. Oh, yes, second by Representative Arnberger. Yep. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay.
No.
I heard a semi-no. Was that a no on the online? Who?
That was a no, Mr. Chairman. Representative Burrows,
Oh, very good.
our ethics committee.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Very good. Are there any further adjustments to the recommendation from the committee or from the agency, or the governor's recommendation rather?
I just have a question.
Yes.
So when you report this out to appropriations and you go through, this is what they proposed, this is what the committee did, do you explain the amendment, this is why, or do we need to make a note of why we did the amendment?
I absolutely explain that.
Okay,
Explain it up front because somebody's going to ask me anyway.
okay. I just wasn't sure if we needed to make a note explaining it or not, so.
I will absolutely be explaining it. Now, if you'd like to make an explanation of that so that I don't just freewheel and make something up, that would be okay too. But I'll probably stick pretty close to the conversation here.
That's fine. I just have never sat through one of your long committee hearings on appropriations, so that's why you're a chair and I'm not.
I recommend it, you should. All right, any further recommendations? Seeing none,
Do you want me to renew my motion?
or close on your motion as amended.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I close on my motion as amended.
All right, very good. Heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. And opposed, nay. All right,
No.
there was 2 noes. That will be the agency or the committee recommendation to the Appropriations Committee. Let's move on to the Kansas Lottery. There's none of this that's SGF, and almost all of the spending is based upon lottery ticket sales or gambling in general. I have 0 notes here. If anyone in the committee would like to make recommendations, I have none.
Chairman, I would make a motion to concur with the governor's recommendation for the Kansas Lottery for years 2022 and 2023.
Motion? Second by Representative Arnberger. Now, the only thing in the governor's recommendation on this doesn't cause me heartburn, but this agency, the more people that are working for it, the more revenue that it makes. And so denying 3 FTE positions, I really didn't understand the rationale behind that. However, the agency had no problem with it because they had space, they had FTEs to spare that they could utilize for this one anyway. So it's okay. I just don't understand the rationale on that one. Discussion? Barnberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, and I apologize for not being here this last week. I stayed home where it was warm in Great Bend. I wouldn't know. My question is probably for staff. Does it state, is it a statute, or is it just a something that we do every year for the first 50 million already being called for of the revenues and where it goes?
Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Dayton Lemundian, Legislative Research. That is in statute, yes.
Okay. The reason I asked that, and I think that it'll probably get brought up later if sports wagering is passed. But, you know, one of the things that we're discussing with sports wagering is raising the Problem and Addiction Grant Fund. And so that's something that I'm curious with the first 50 million and so forth. So anyways, just wanted to make that comment.
Excellent. Yeah, but that is statutory. We can change it, but not in our report to appropriations. It takes a little bit more than that. French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure I understood what you were talking about, but
We're talking about the sports wagering. It's a bill, again, that is being discussed this year. And it's going to be, if it's underneath the lottery, so forth.
okay. I have a different issue with this particular budget, and it's simply because we're funding this effort. At the same time, we're funding an effort to keep people from gambling at the same time. And to me, I don't know, I still have a hard problem with this. Although I understand the need, if it's that bad, why are we doing it? So it's just, to me, I just have a problem with this budget because of that one thing.
I understand. We children's initiatives with cigarette money. I get it. I understand. Some of these things are very strange. I think this one works in a way, though, in that, I mean, it is gambling, absolutely, but the money generated from this part of it, a portion, is utilized for people who have a gambling addiction. The vast majority of people do not have a gambling addiction. And so as a game, as a pastime, and as a moneymaker for the state, it has merit. But then at the same time, it's similarly funding it because it may very well create problems for people who have that particular addiction.
That's exactly my point. Thank you.
Someone already moved this budget? Representative Amix, yes, you moved it, and you seconded it. All right, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor of passing out the 2022-23 budget for the Kansas Lottery as per the governor's recommendation, say aye. Opposed, say nay. Very good. That will be the report to appropriations. Gosh, we're having so much fun. Let's go on with racing and gaming. What do you say? All right. Well, to get the discussion going, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make the motion. I move that we pass out the Kansas Racing and Gaming Commission budget for fiscal year 2022 and 2023 as the governor recommended.
Seconded by Representative Clark. All right, discussion. The only point I had was one that the agency didn't seem to have a problem with, and that was the Expanded Lottery Act Regulation Fund. They said that those are trued up quarterly, and so if we look at the historic numbers, everything is absolutely fine. If we look at the projected numbers, it takes a dive. And so it's my understanding that the quarterly truing up of that fund will rectify what looks like a head dive into zero as far as its fund balance is concerned. So that was my only note. And I certainly don't need to include that in the appropriations report. I feel no need there whatsoever. Does anyone else have something that they would like included in the appropriations report out? Seeing none, then. All those in favor of passing out the Racing and Gaming Commission budget for 22 and 23 as per the governor's recommendation, say aye. And opposed, say nay. Very good. I saved the troublemaking one for last. The Hearing Aid Board Fee Fund.
Mr. Chairman, I would make a recommendation. We do the governor's recommendation for fiscal year 2022 and 2023.
Second by Representative Amix. All right, very good. The only thing I had was the fee fund was skyrocketing. Well, not skyrocketing, but it was going up pretty good at 133,000 or almost 3 times the expenditures for the board, the annual expenditures for the board in one fee fund. Now, the agency said that they'd be revisiting fees to bring those down. I think we should absolutely make a note that we need to be revisiting those fees sooner rather than a whole bunch of yays. So I'll go ahead and say, all those in favor of that commentary being added to the report, say aye. And opposed, say nay. Very good. Any other feedback that you'd like reported to appropriations?
Chairman, so have they in the past looked at, for some of these boards like this hearing aid examiners, as far as combining it with some other board and just, I mean, has that been discussed seriously, or is it just?
Costco's at your office right now, as a matter of fact. No, should we take a look at that sort of thing? Yes. The budget report out procedure isn't exactly the mechanism for that. I think that there are, in fact, if we look at the practices of other states, you'll find a board, the name fluctuates a little bit, but it's kind of along the lines of technical professionals. And they might have 8 or 10 or 12 boards underneath them, things like mortuary arts, hearing aids. In fact, I think even the healing arts, oftentimes under that, you can fit it into a much more concise area. Now, does it change the mechanics? Too much, because each of those technical professionals board has a panel for each one. It would make our budgeting a whole heck of a lot easier, yes, because everything would funnel straight. as far as changing the process for the end users, wouldn't change things much at all. I would also be very interested, and this is an aside, this isn't something that we would necessarily handle in this committee, but look at exactly how necessary some boards are. I get that government should provide some level of consumer protection or licensure protection, that sort of thing. It's true. But in what areas and to what extent? I think those are valid questions. But not one for the appropriations. Further discussion? Seeing none. All right then. Did I already move my little notation on there? Okay, that's what we need to do. Good. All those in favor of passing out the 2022-2023 hearing aid board budget as per the governor's recommendation and with my annotation, say aye. Opposed, say nay. All right, very good. Ladies and gentlemen, we are moving right along. All right, tomorrow, class, we will be hearing from the Kansas Human Rights Commission and the Office of Administrative Hearings. That actually might be kind of interesting with the COVID shutdown, and now we're coming back. I think that might be, oh, and that'll be you as well. Oh, it won't be you. Perfect. Excellent, perfect. We'll also be taking action on the CAPERS budget. So all of you who want to throw an extra $1 billion at it, no, that won't be in this committee. But until that time, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned.